Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Brutally Honest podcast. I'm your host, Kathryn Ducey. I'm coming at you with a real raw, unfiltered, and vulnerable episode on my marriage. I was previously married for 1 year, and a lot of you who are listening to this podcast are probably followers of mine who watched the journey that my ex-husband Chris and I had. It was really, really special and really wonderful, and also a really challenging time for both he and I. And I wanted to share about the relationship, but I want to do something a little unique that I don't see many people do. I want to come at it from the perspective of why I ended up choosing him, and ultimately how it was meant to be a catalyst for me to have an awakening and see a lot of the pain that I was still carrying from my childhood. I could come at this whole thing from a very victim-y place. In fact, during my marriage, I was deep in victim consciousness. I took pleasure in blaming him for a lot of our problems. I also did take a lot of responsibility, but it was almost too painful for me to admit some of the things that he was reflecting back to me about myself. And the best that I could do sometimes was to look outside of myself and make him wrong. Our story is also really romantic. We had such a unique experience about how we came together. And I think that it wouldn't be doing the story justice if I didn't share a little bit about this. I have shared about it on Instagram, and it is always one of the favorite stories that people really enjoy. And so I thought I'd give you a little bit of a taste as to how Chris and I met, and then I'll take you into the lessons that I learned that took me a good 2 years post-divorce to really see, and also took me getting into a new relationship and becoming a full-time step-parent to realize just how much wounding I had brought into that dynamic and what was being projected, and how it was probably not going to work, but it was the best thing for both of us. Our story is actually really fun. Like I said, it was really romantic. Chris and I met on Instagram, of all places. I've told so many people that there's a ton of opportunity on Instagram if you know how to work the system, which I do very well. So we met on a specialty coffee profile. The name is Manati's, and Manati's is down in Venice Beach, California. At the time, I was living in like this back house cabin in Venice Beach. It was April of the pandemic. So this was 2020. I had sold all my belongings back in Toronto, Ontario. I had 2 suitcases. I had moved to Los Angeles, relocated to Los Angeles, and I was basically paying pennies for this Airbnb, which was about like 200 square feet with a bunk bed and a shower and like a hot plate to cook on. Having the time of my life. If you follow me at the time, I called it Camp Kathryn. You know, there I am. It's the world shut down, and I am someone who's really passionate about specialty coffee. You remember when, all of these coffee shops had closed down, and then slowly over time, they were figuring out, how to use plexiglass and how to socially distance and how to sell, from a window. And they were slowly starting to reopen, and they would announce that on Instagram. So Manati's had made this post saying, we're reopening, come see us, and talk to us through this glass. And I was so excited, guys, right? And so I wanted to go and write a comment on this post. And so as I'm typing the comment and then I post it, I realize the comment above mine is this red emoji heart. But I look at the photograph of the person who's posted it, and I click on it, and I realize, wow, this person is really attractive and really cool. And it's Chris's profile. My first reaction was great looking guy, super talented. His feed was like really beautiful. I could tell he was really into photography. I later found out he was a professional photographer. Through my investigative abilities, I was able to uncover that he was a dad, right? So that was like really attractive for me. It says a lot about a man if he has a kid, probably a little more mature, right? And I was instantly taken by him. So as you do, right? If you want someone to notice you, you notice them first, right? You like their photos. You give them a little like sign, hey, I'm here. And it worked. He ended up seeing in his feed that this woman was liking a bunch of his stuff. And he ended up going into my profile and something very serendipitous happened. He found a photo of me sitting at a coffee shop in Toronto called Sam James, where I spent a lot of time when I lived in Toronto. Shout out to my friends and my dear friend Sam James Coffee. He ended up recognizing the name Sam James in one of my pictures, and turns out he knows him, okay? Chris spent a lot of time in New York. He lived in New York, actually. And Sam spent a lot of time in New York as well because his then girlfriend was going to school down there, right? So they're both from Toronto, but she was going to school down there. So he would go visit. And a mutual friend, one of Sam and Chris's mutual friends, introduced them, okay? Small frickin' world. So he recognizes this coffee shop and he ends up writing on my post saying, I love Sam James, okay? And I'm like, okay, it's on. So I dive into his DMs. I send him a voice note. It was really thoughtful, as I am very thoughtful. And, I mentioned his daughter and that I recognized that he's a dad. And so began our communication. That opened up our communication and we started to chit chat. And, it took us basically a week to end up planning a date. And we ended up getting together, went and watched the sunset in Santa Monica, just sitting on a hill there. I brought a bunch of charcuterie, cheeses and meats and breads. And he brought with him a beautiful bottle of skin contact orange wine. Natural wines are a huge deal and were a way bigger deal down in California at the time than anywhere else. Now they're a huge deal everywhere else. But I'll never forget when Chris pulled up on his bike, I was like, oh my God, this guy's so tall. So he's about like 6'5". I'm 5'1.5". Okay. So I was like, oh, so great. He's so tall. That's so hot. Yada, yada, yada. Now, ladies, I will tell you that my current partner and future husband, we're not engaged, but he will be my husband at some point, is 5'7". Okay. And I got over whatever interesting, beliefs I had around a tall man will make you look better. Okay. Well, maybe that is true on some level, but for me, it wasn't the case. Okay. So anyway, I was like, wow, he's so tall and so handsome. And we ended up having a really fun night. We had some wine, we had some charcuterie, the sun went down. There was other people hanging out around us, and not everybody was as fearful as others during the pandemic. I was one of those people who I didn't fear things as much as maybe, my parents did or some of my friends. So we're having a great night. And what I'm about to tell you is one of the biggest reasons why our relationship ended up not working. Okay. Chris invited me back to his home that night. And it was a school night for me, meaning I had work the next day. I think it was a Sunday. And I usually started, at 8 a.m. because I was in the West Coast and most of my clients were in the East Coast. So, I would start at about 8:30 my time, which is pretty early for me. I don't usually start work till like 10:30 now. And so he invited me back to his house. And I remember there was a quiet whisper inside of me, which is my intuition, saying, don't do it. Okay. But I had a history of not trusting my intuition, not trusting my gut, and going against what my body was saying to do, and then going up into my head and making decisions from my head. So my head was saying, hot guy, super fun. You want him to know you like him. You want this to become something, right? Very like controlling and very not living in the moment, future forecasty, all this kind of stuff. Oh, you're only getting older, right? Oh, you need to find yourself a husband. Whatever was going on in my head ended up making the decision, right? I went against my intuitive instinct. That had been a theme for most of my life, okay? And the reason being is because you and I come from a long lineage of believing that parents must break their child's will. Okay. And I'll speak about this more in upcoming podcasts, but this has been a real focus of my research and my work, especially in the last year since becoming a full-time step parent. This belief holds that a child's natural desires, independence, or assertiveness being like their will, right, is inherently rebellious or sinful and must be subdued to ensure obedience, to ensure compliance, right, and good behavior. So the goal for most of our parents, unbeknownst to them, it was very unconscious for them, and this started with their parents, then started with their grandparents, all that kind of stuff. The goal was to suppress the child's autonomy, making them what we would call docile and aligned with parental or societal expectations. So basically, our parents and our grandparents and their parents, right, they saw it as preparing their children for a more like structured world, preventing spoiled or unruly behavior. So breaking a child's will leads to a whole whack of issues, a whole whack of emotional, mental, spiritual, and physical issues. That was a big part of my wounding. So I grew up as an obedient, complying, performative, good little girl. I also grew up with a lot of internalized toxic shame. I am inherently flawed. I am inherently bad. There's something wrong with me. Not healthy shame, which is, oh, something has happened here and I feel ashamed about that, right? It's I am bad, not there is bad. That's a big distinction. And so I grew up with this belief that there is something inherently wrong with me and that I need to be fixed and I need to be saved. And that was basically part of the dynamic with my family, right? It was, oh, Kathryn is broken. There's something wrong with her. She needs to be saved. She needs to be fixed. And that is woven into the entire belief system, right? Of children need to be seen, not heard. You know, children are the property of the parents, the possession of the parents. They owe their parents, all that good stuff that we can't see, that we actually do believe in on some level. And I'm going to do another podcast episode on all those beliefs that I've realized that I also carry and have projected onto my two girls. And it's been both heartbreaking and also very enlightening and wonderful and beautiful that I can now see that. So I brought with me a lot of pain and shame into this relationship with Chris. And when you are carrying around a lot of toxic shame, you will do some really funny and weird things in order to protect yourself and in order to create safety for yourself, right? And these are things that you will have started doing when you were a kid. So one of those things is I can get very controlling, and very rigid. Okay, where the rules come before the connection. So I spent a lot of our relationship making sure that the house was perfect, right? Making sure that I always looked good, working a lot, right? So channeling all of my energy into helping other people. I got a lot of validation at the time from that. And I derived a lot of my worth from working. At the time, my business was thriving, and I had about 25 clients at a time for about 2 years. I would sometimes even work on Saturdays. So I had full back-to-back days of clients that I was seeing from, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. So I had this very rigid way of moving about the home and moving about our relationship. And part of that was to signal to my partner, and I couldn't see this at the time, don't try and get close to me because I don't trust you and I don't trust intimacy. So because the rules came before the connection growing up for me as a kid, and there was always something wrong with me and I always need to be fixed and I always need to be saved, I believed, oh, there's something wrong with me and that I am not worthy of closeness or intimacy. Now, another thing that I took away from my childhood, which was very hidden for me at the time and I couldn't see, was that I believe that sex is evil. It is bad to desire sex. It's bad to have desires. And All of that needs to be suppressed. It needs to be hidden and needs to be compensated for. I didn't grow up necessarily religious, but I did have a caretaker, a babysitter, who raised me from the ages of like 6 weeks till, I don't know, 8, 9, 10. And she was quite Christian. She had grown up in a religious home. So a lot of her mannerisms, demeanor, belief systems came from the church. And we know that the church's influence on, children are sinful and children are evil is pretty strong. And whether you go to church or not, it's also woven into your consciousness. So through my interactions with her and her husband, who I spent most of my days with as a child before the age of 10, I took away that desires and sex and closeness and intimacy are sinful. Okay. She had a bit of like a asexual vibe, I would say. So she was my role model when it came to how women should carry themselves or can carry themselves, the feminine flow, the feminine muse. She was my role model. And I'll tell you, there was no muse. There was no flow. She kind of, I say this with a lot of love, kind of looked like a man and acted like a man. She was very rigid, very masculine. And again, the word asexual comes up. So children between the ages of 0 and 7 are being programmed and conditioned when it comes to how to speak, how to love, how to be loved, what shapes to take with your body, right? Who's safe, who's not safe, all that stuff, okay? Everything is programmed into a child between the ages of 0 and 7. And because of the amount of time I was spending with her, she basically conditioned me to believe all these things that I didn't have a choice for at the time because I was a child, and children don't have boundaries, right? We look to our caretakers and our parents as basically our God, and we trust them. Why wouldn't we? And we trust the information we're getting from them, and we don't question any of it. Most of us actually will go through the rest of our lives not even questioning any of it, even if it is not supporting you in a way that's helpful in your life. So there was a lot of religious influence when it comes to sex and sensuality that I carried into my adult life and then projected onto my partners. Now insert my ex-husband. My ex-husband is someone who, would identify as a very sensual person, a very sexual person. He had these really beautiful desires for me, and I saw his desires as something to be ashamed of. In fact, I would shame him for his desires. Basically, I started to diagnose him, which was interesting, with having an issue, pathologizing his desires. Now, at the time, I couldn't see that this is what I was doing. And this is how easy this can be when you are in survival. It's the same thing in parenting. I see this often with my clients. They'll come to me and they'll have these I am statements, like, I am bad because I am this. And I'll say, no, you're not at all. Where'd you get that from? And, we'll do our work together and we'll realize, oh, somewhere along the line as a kid, your mom and or dad felt so threatened by your individuation and your unique expression, your emotions, your desires, your wants. And, they were emotionally mature, and the best they could do was make you out to be bad or wrong and to make you suppress that stuff, right? So then you decide, oh, I am inherently flawed, and you carry that into your adulthood. So I was doing this to my ex-husband. I was pathologizing these desires that he had for intimacy and closeness to me and trying to convince him that he had an issue. That's what I mean by this is a very raw and unfiltered episode. Why I'm telling you this is because we're all up to some interesting behaviors that we can't see. And this is a big part of the human experience. And it's not something to be ashamed of, but it's also not something that we want to use as an excuse for our behavior. So he resisted a lot of that, and rightfully so. Rightfully so. But there were times where he started to believe that maybe he was like a sex addict. That was the type of thing I would say. I think you have like a sex addiction. Our relationship was basically made up of me trying to get away from him intimately, right? him trying to get closer to me, and us spending most of our days living in a place of fear because he knew he was going to get rejected and I knew that I was going to have to reject him again. Okay, that was basically our cycle. And then there was a couple of days off in between. And I've studied a lot about this post-divorce, post-separation, and understanding how hard this must have been also for him to be constantly rejected by me. And also how hard it was for me to feel very rejected and abandoned as a kid, right? So you hurt people, just hurt people. If I felt really abandoned and rejected, I'm going to do that to my partner. And I'm also going to expect them to want less and to abandon and reject themselves because I've been doing it this whole time, right? Him and I, we were married about a year into knowing each other, and then we separated about a year later. So you can imagine the exhaustion that we felt day in and day out. By the time our marriage ended, which was a year after we got married, I was very, very, very thin. I had lost most of my hair. He had started to lose a lot of his hair. He had a gorgeous head of hair when we met, and he had started to lose it, started to get a bald spot. You know, he had a lot of eczema or psoriasis that was showing up, a lot of symptoms that was saying, hey, my body is under a lot of stress, right? And I was also experiencing some psoriasis, eczema, we're not really sure. And we were just totally burnt out and exhausted. We never felt safe together. It was very rare. And he also brought a lot of his own wounding into this relationship. I'd say a lot of our stuff mirrored each other. He grew up with a father who had fought in the Vietnam War and was severely traumatized and then, couldn't really show up for his son. So he felt often like he was a chicken just getting scraps, in the yard with his dad. And his mom was often, spent a lot of time protecting his father. And Chris felt really unseen and he felt really unheard, and he carried a lot of shame too. And then it was just recreating the whole thing in our marriage, right? He couldn't get his father to pay attention to him and love him the way that he needed to. He felt his needs and his wants and his desires were too over the top. He was too needy. Then he comes into our relationship and the whole thing just gets recreated again, right? So it's this vicious cycle until you take a minute and pause and go and take a look at, okay, what's playing out here? And you reclaim who you are and all the beautiful parts of you, including, your wants. So our separation was a little bit more amicable than I'd say others were, but it was challenging in the fact that we stayed in touch after. And we actually debated on whether we were going to get back together for a while. We did do a couple of visits. He came to Mexico City where I was living, and I came to LA where we had our marital home. But something again told us both, no, this wasn't right. And at the same time, I was building a stronger connection to my intuition, and so was he. He was doing a lot of the personal development work as well. And our internal wisdom and guide was getting louder and louder to the point where we knew, okay, this is it. This is not going to work. Ultimately, what ended up happening, which was rather difficult, but sometimes the only way to do it, was that Chris started to see someone. And he is still with that person to this day. And I was quite devastated when I started to figure out something was going on. And the best thing that we could do was completely cut each other out. Now, would I say that I am proud of any of the ways in which I acted during our marriage? I'd say that I have a lot of compassion for myself. I have a lot of forgiveness. You can't see what you can't see that you can't see at the time. And it's the same thing in parenting, guys. I mean, depending on what you believe, I believe that our soul chose our body and chose our parents because it needed to complete some really difficult lessons in this time. Mine needed to come in here. Depending on what you believe, I believe that our souls choose our parents and choose our bodies, and everything is sort of planned out because our soul has this agenda to complete certain tasks. And so there were a lot of tasks and continue to be a lot of tasks that I need to complete in this lifetime. And that all needed to happen for me. It did. And unfortunately, there were broken hearts in the process. His included, mine included. Chris does have a daughter. I often consider the impact that this will have on her. I'll probably do another episode on that. There has been definitely some shame in that arena for me, for sure. And some things I'm realizing now that I'm a full-time mom to two young girls and how much they, take on. Now, every child is different. Every soul is different. Some children are more sensitive than others. Two children can be in the same family that, their parents get divorced and one walks away unscathed and the other is completely traumatized. Okay. So every child is different. And I'm not just telling myself that to make myself feel better. I'm sure there will be some remnants of this very quick relationship and 1-year marriage that will leave a mark on that young person. And that is something that I do live with, but I do not beat myself up over. And I continue to practice a lot of self-compassion and self-forgiveness. Well, I wanted to do just like a bit of a high level as to what it was like for me in my marriage and why I ended up choosing my husband at the time. And ultimately what led to our separation was a lack of safety and a lot of wounding that we just could not get through together. And we were only really meant to, I think, journey for those, 2.5, 3 years together. I'm deeply grateful for that time with Chris. I see that man as an amazing guy. Like, I have nothing but great things to say about him and a lot of love for him, even though we are not in communication. We do not talk today. If anybody asks me about him, I have nothing but great things to say. And I do wish him all the best in his current relationship and in his life. And will we talk ever again? I don't know. Maybe. I do believe that he is now, he talks to his wife before me. So he was married before me. And, sometimes it just takes time. You got to let the dust settle. And sometimes it takes time to get out of your own way and to be able to say, hey, I want to take responsibility for this, this, and this. So that could be a possibility at some point. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you saw something for yourself. I really want to encourage people to get out of that victim mode when it comes to relationships they've been in or marriages or the end of a marriage. It just disempowers us when we look at it as someone else's fault and we can take radical responsibility for ourselves. So if you found this episode valuable, please, if it feels right for you, leave a 5-star review. It'd mean the world to me. Or if you'd like to share this with someone else, someone who might need a new perspective on what happened in their relationship, I would love that. That would mean the world to me. All right, folks. Well, that's all for now. I've got some really great episodes coming up soon for you, so stay tuned and I will talk to you soon.